The following program is sponsored by The Greek, Ely's Radio Shack dealer at 570 Altman in downtown Ely, and brought to you as a public service by Georgetown Media in Ely, Nevada. Natural Resources Advisory Committee meeting, July 18, 2023.
You'll be running.
You just say no, that's what it says. We're not healthy.
Oh, wow. As long as I've been around, well, maybe not how long. Since I've been out of high school, he's always down.
I should know more, but I don't.
All right, it's 5:30. We'll call this Natural Resource Advisory Committee meeting to order. And the first thing on the agenda is the pledge. Ross, you want to lead us?
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
We'll move down to item number 2, public comment. Is there any public comment? George?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I've asked this committee several questions going back to February 21st, 2023. I have not received any kind of answer as of this date. I submitted a written request on April 17th, 2023, resubmitted May 16th, 2023, and I'm resubmitting today, the request today, and would like some answers. On the issue that I submitted regarding the county golf course proposal, I want to remind you that the golf course needs to stay on city supplied water, and they need to pay their fair share, which they're not doing now. They get a significant discount. This helps the city utility stay afloat, and it benefits all users. I'm also going to submit a report from Frederick Partey from KGHM. Oops. The mine now is still pumping 1,186 gallons per minute down Gleason Creek. That water needs to be used. I don't know if it's being used or not, but allocating water from the 25,000 acre feet that's allocated for industrial growth is not going to cut it. Let's see here. I noticed on different agendas, the county is attempting to get water rights from the 25,000 acre feet of water set aside by the state for industrial growth. However, some allocations are being made that have nothing to do with industrial growth at all. If the county continues to allocate from the allotment set aside for a given purpose, and yet it is allocated outside of those parameters set, we run the risk of losing any potential industrial growth. The state can take that industrial growth, that 25,000 acre feet set aside for industrial growth because we're not showing clear intent. I'm concerned about that. Those that make the rules, rule. Clark County is considerably bigger than we are. We're spending a lot of money fighting them, and yet when they put out 25,000 acre feet to us for industrial growth and we're using it for other purposes, we're sending out the wrong message, and we need to be clear on that. That's all I have at this time, Mr. Chairman.
Thanks, George. Is there any other public comment? Hearing none, we'll move down to item 3, which is discussion of possible action. The committee will review the Nevada Division of Water Resources monthly report for water filings made in June 2023. The committee may take action to recommend county review and/or involvement in any application that may affect county's water resources or related interest. Jeremy?
Chairman, just an editorial note, if you can hear me all right. It's a little bit tough to hear on your end, and it could be just my microphone, so just to note if anyone else is having problems. With that being said, Chairman, this will be the easiest report I ever provide. I didn't see anything posted on the June report for the state engineer as far as filings, so I have nothing to report for item 3.
Glad I wasn't the only one that didn't see anything. Thanks, Jeremy. We'll move down to item 4, discussion for possible action. The committee will review a draft energy section for the White Pine Public Land Policy Plan, and may provide input or proposed additions or other revisions, including specific areas of the county where renewable energy may be directed or discouraged. The goal would be to bring an updated draft back to the committee in July for possible recommendations to the Board of County Commissioners for adoption. Jeremy?
Yep, Chairman, so what I'll do quickly is step through the updates that were made and should be in your support material. So anything that I've updated, or I should say anything that I've added is highlighted in green. So you'll see a couple of items there on page 1 that are pretty minor. Page 2 is where page 3 is where we get into a few more updates. As I said, green is additions, yellow is revisions. So on policy 20-6, we talked about trying to reduce any sort of impacts from renewable energy projects on private property, including land, mining claims, and water rights. Policy 20-7, we talked about appropriate buffers being applied where necessary. 20-8, we added a bullet on co-location of energy projects and infrastructure. 20-9, we talked about adding a couple concepts here on smart from the start, and this is a policy that I split. So the first part on page 3 talks about kind of general areas that we don't believe meet smart from the start principles, and then top of page 4 calls out some of the specific geographic locations that we talked about last time. So on page 3, on the general areas, in addition to priority wildlife habitat, riparian areas, we added white sage, highly erosive soils, private property, and active grazing allotments without proper or appropriate mitigation. And we added a couple of policies on that I'll get to in just a second. On top of page 4, again, the specific geographic locations that this committee recommended last time, Duck Creek Basin, state designated special management areas, and I believe we specifically talked about Cable Lake State Park and Steptoe Valley WMA, and then federally designated special management areas, and we specifically call out Great Basin National Park and any national conservation area or wilderness areas, with a call out to section 8 of the plan that has an entire list of those. Policy 20-10, we actually added the county's encouragement of biomass energy projects that complement hazardous fuels reduction and wildlife habitat improvement projects, as well as hydraulic power projects that can utilize existing infrastructure. I know that's come up a couple times in this committee in the past, and it's something that I just hadn't added in the original iteration of the draft. Policy 2011 talks about avoiding to the greatest possible extent private property, including land, mineral claims, and water rights. If a project can't be avoided, the project proponent shall work with the directly affected owners to develop appropriate minimization and mitigation. The county does not support eminent domain for renewable energy projects. I know that was brought up last time. Policy 2012, which is new, talks about impacts to grazing allotments. And again, we talked about avoiding to the greatest extent possible, and anything that can't be avoided should be mitigated in coordination with the permittee, and any of that mitigation should be included in the project NEPA so that it's sufficient in being implemented. Policy 20-14, we talked about developing in a manner that preserves cultural resources. 2015, we talk about water conservation and minimizing water consumption. 20-16 is a new one. We talk about following regulations and ordinances to minimize water erosion during construction and operations of projects, which we talked about last time. 2017, this is an item that came up, I think, from several of you. County shall advocate for termination of stagnant applications for development of renewable energy projects, as well as authorized projects that have not been constructed. If an application or project is inactive for 5 years, then a new application or authorization should be required. There's no magic to that 5-year mark. I just kind of threw a dart at the wall. But of note, this policy is a little bit interesting, and that it's probably a comment I will make to the BLM's proposed rule that regulates renewable energy projects, because I know this has been a problem in the past, and I anticipate it being an issue going forward, not only in White Pine County, but other counties. Policy 20-18, this is one, and 19 for that matter, that I've been able to talk to County Manager Weevil on. So this was the one that talked about adherence to the White Pine County Code. And instead of calling out any specific code reference, we just generally say that it should follow the code as appropriate. And then we added that the county will review and update its code as appropriate to ensure that all allowable county authorizations, reviews, and coordination is being considered by all renewable energy projects. And then we added project policy 2019, projects that impact county-provided emergency and other services, including temporary or long-term housing, will require a development agreement between the county and the project proponent. Projects that plan to use county roads will require a road maintenance agreement between the county and project proponent. Manager Weevil thought both of these policies look good and has suggested adding 2 emergency services as well. And I will do that. Page 6, we had one additional policy, which has become 20-26. All renewable energy projects should require to have a noxious and invasive species plan, wildfire prevention and management plan. And then in what is now policy 2028, we talk about consulting with affected private property owners, as well as the Tri-County Weed District. So, Chairman, a pretty extensive update, but most of this is directly from the feedback from the committee last time. And with that, I would be happy to answer any questions.
Jeremy, this is Bill Wilson, and I don't want to be nitpicky here, but on, where's the first one here? Policy 21, that first, you had one a minute ago. Policy 1, you specify all relevant federal agencies to be all, is it appropriate here to put in state agencies and other agencies?
I think that is appropriate, Bill. Which policy was that again?
Right at the start, 20-1. Very first line.
Yep. Added.
Okay, and then 20-8 on energy and things. And I'm a little wishy-washy on this, but as well as abandoned mining lands, they're lands that have invalid mining claims on them. Sometimes they're for nuisance, or other times the claimant just didn't know how to keep them up to date. And there's also mineral leases, things like oil well leases.
So your thought is to add abandoned mineral leases or invalid mining claims to the list, is your thought?
Yeah, both of those. Abandoned mining claims and mineral leases.
So on the mineral leases, you have a lease for I don't know if you have a mineral lease, if you can go in there and put renewable on. You know, you know what I'm saying? Just, I'd have to go through the normal process. Even as a permittee, I have a right for the grazing part of it, but just because I have a permit doesn't mean I can go put renewables on. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And usually those oil plants, like, you know, the surface disturbance would be a few acres.
Yeah, they're not
They're
very
not
big.
very big. I mean, I guess enough for a wind tower or something. So, we can throw it on there and just, it's better to have it than not have it, but I just don't know.
Or review of.
Yeah.
Yeah, mining claims are very hard to dodge them, right? I remember when I was with the BLM, we went down to Vegas to do a validity assessment on placer mining claims. The guy had just recently discovered placer gold on land that was being sold off for development. Yeah. All right, thanks, Jeremy.
Was that all you had, Bill?
Yeah.
Okay. Dave?
So, Dave, Jeremy, this is Dave. We all call white sage, but it's actually winter fat. And maybe that should be clarified in there. And then I apologize for missing last meeting if you covered this, and maybe it's not even exactly on topic, but what are the tax differences from a development on private property versus federal? You know, I'm thinking, you know, payment in lieu of taxes. You would think if a project went in White Pine County that would greatly increase the tax revenue to the county, because you've changed the use of the land, even though it's governed. It ought to be comparable to private land. That's what I'm saying. Once it's developed for tax purposes.
Yeah,
To the
that's
county,
a great
yeah.
question. Manager Weevil might be able to answer that one better than me. So at least on public lands, I can speak to that a little bit. As far as tilt goes, a renewable energy project shouldn't affect tilt, because that's still, you know, public land managed by the federal agencies. And it's just a lease that's being authorized. So I don't think that would take away from tilt. And on solar and wind, because it's a right-of-way, there is no revenue sharing that comes back to the county. So once that project's in, whatever they're paying to the federal government stays with the federal government. It's a little bit different scenario with geothermal. There's a royalty there, and I want to say like 25% comes back to state and or local government. So a little different animal. But I can't speak for if a solar development went in on private property, you know, what that would look like in terms of tax base for the county. And of course, I think whether it's private or public, you're still getting some revenue off like sales tax when the construction's going on and things associated with construction. But maybe Manager Weevil could speak more specific to potential for county tax on development on private.
So as far as you know, there's no, I would think there should be an increase in PILT if there's industrial development on federal land in the county.
How is that taxed as well? Like, when you, I know this is, you know, I just don't really understand it that well, but if you're creating energy in a county but shipping it somewhere else, I mean,
And the federal government.
we create
gets all
cabs
the
in the
money.
county, but we ship it somewhere else, but we still get, there's still a tax there. There's a gross margin tax that we have to pay in the state of Nevada out right now, you know. So whether you're shipping it to California or not, there should be some type of gross margin tax. I don't know if that's paid to the county, I think it's paid to the state, but still, if you're producing it here, there should be something paid.
If it's.
That's the same concept, right?
Yeah, if it's private property and it shifts from ag land to industrial land, then your tax liability
It still
increases significant.
And that should,
it
and that's a
goes to
different
the county.
deal, I'm sorry, that's a different deal too, like that,
But it should be the same on federal land.
yeah, you put a
Bill should
project
come
on
up.
federal land, that's what I think,
Does the county get to charge personal property taxes on that stuff?
Yeah, so here, let me just address this a little bit. Mike Weaver for the record. Okay, a couple things about taxation of renewable energy. It's all different. Depends on whether you're solar or wind or whatever. There's also a lot of abatements and setbacks, and so they don't ever pay as much as you think you're gonna pay. And all that stuff goes to the state. It doesn't come to the county. We don't have a county tax structure for that, and it's probably not even allowed by ordinance because the state has retains those rights. What the county does get a tax on, whether it's private or on public land on a long lease, like at BLM, is we get a tax on the personal property, all the improvements and other structures they have out there, just like all you guys get taxed by Burton, right, for your tractors and your equipment, your generator, whatever, including during the construction phase, we get a tax the construction companies for their equipment.
just to clarify, that's on private?
It's on-
BLM too?
It's on BLM too, yeah.
Great.
Because it's not really, it doesn't run, that tax, that assessment doesn't run with the land, it's more about the personal property that exists in the county during the tax year, regardless of the land. And so, the way we, on these kind of projects, whether it be solar or wind or hydro or whatever, there will be a significant assessed personal property tax. And that's where the majority of those numbers that we've been hearing about some of these different projects for revenues coming to the county general fund that we can put to the library or the roads or whatever. A significant majority of those funds come from assessed value of personal property. The tax that, there is a special tax structure, I'm not really a specialist on it, even I don't think Burton is either, because the state tax structure on electrical transmission or generation, that's all a state tax structure, and we'd have to do a deep dive on that, just to answer your question. But I do want to say this is a little far outside of these policies here. So we probably just need to steer it back to looking at these policies here and just making sure we have a hand in the game to understand, the state really wants us to push these projects because it makes the state money. And it satisfies all their other goals and mandates that are in there, right? And so I think suggesting we add the language to work with state agencies is important, so we can at least be made aware of what's happening. So that's kind of that's the extent of my knowledge on taxation stuff. Yeah, it's not very helpful, I'm sorry.
If you could bear with me for just a second,
Yeah.
say for instance, this pumped hydro thing, the money that they promised the county, that the county would receive and if the project goes forward, would be based on the value of their turbines and their pumps and their tunnels and their reservoirs?
I believe so. And so the person who can answer that better, we can invite Burton to come in and answer some of those specific questions on what and how and what other kind of weird deals that the government may have where they can abate or depreciate some of that stuff, I don't know. But I'm sure they're gonna try to cut back as much as they can.
Right.
And any business owner would. So, but he would be able to explain to you better where those numbers come from and how, and based on what plans also.
And based on what they're promising the county.
Yeah, the
Nice
plans
to
have
know.
changed, and so, yeah, that's where those things are, it's not coming on a property tax. Property tax is pretty stable, and that specific project isn't even gonna be on. It's a long lease on BLM land, so there's no property tax being paid.
Right.
So, unlike us who pay property taxes for our residents.
Just got the bill.
Anything else for a second?
Thank you.
Thank you.
And Chairman, if I may, I'm going to flag just one other thing before we get off the tax discussion. So the last two policies kind of speak to this. 20-32 talks about any changes to leasing or revenue sharing agreements on public land should require an equitable split proceeds with the county. The county will coordinate with its congressional delegation and NACO to develop favorable policies in this regard. So that's actually there's a couple of bills floating around in Congress that would require royalties be collected off renewables such as solar and wind. So I think that's a position that many rural counties have taken and looked at. And then policy 20-33 talks about not supporting federal or state abatements that negatively impact county tax collections. So we do, speak to this issue in at least general terms.
So would that include like any type of impact fees that the county has to endure?
We could certainly write, if we want to specify impact fees, we could certainly write that in there.
I'm just curious. So that gets, one of the things I seen on 20-19 was development of roads, provide emergency services and other services. Is a lot of times these projects are a little off beaten path, so access and egress and signage, I mean, I think is important for emergency services.
Yeah, and I think that was the conversation I had earlier with the county manager, is let's not limit it to, just emergency services either. I think we talked about having, like social and emergency services in there.
Well, we've gone through this in quite a bit, and I like it a lot better now than the very first one that we had, so.
Very good.
Was there anything else anybody had? Thank you, Jeremy. This is pretty good. I think it's
I'm
good.
sorry about that. Just to note, this is an action item on the next commission agenda, so I don't know if the committee wants to make a formal recommendation to the commission or not, or if the commission will be in a position to adopt this. They did not take action last time, kind of at my recommendation to bring it back to you all. So I don't know if you feel like this is in a position where you can, take an action and recommend adoption, or whether you want to see it back. But just to note, it will be on the agenda for next week.
The talk last meeting was, we probably should get it as close as we can and get it voted on, make it policy as soon as possible, don't wait any longer. I think we can always change it.
We can always make recommendations to change, but I think we've gone through it 3 meetings now, so I think I'm comfortable if somebody,
I make a motion to approve it.
With Bill's additions?
yes.
Yeah.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay.
Thank you.
Motion passes, and we'll go recommendation to the county commission. Thanks, Jeremy. We'll move down to item 5, discussion update from White Pine County.
Mr. Mike.
Hey, Mike Beagle, County Manager for the record. I'm here to just answer questions today. I don't have anything new to present, as Jeremy pretty much does that for the county every time, so.
Any questions, comments? I think this energy section is good for the county. I think it's a good guideline to get started, and
Good. I'll tell you,
I hope it's helpful.
Jeremy sent a couple of model ordinances from Nye County that I sent to the DA's office tonight. We're gonna be looking at them to see if we can adopt or model anything else, to make sure that we have the ability as a county to influence the development. It's difficult, we don't wanna tax anything off of that, but everyone makes money but the county sometimes in this sense, and it's our land to take. So we wanna make sure this involved process through development agreements, and also the special use permitting process. And that there's 2 hands there. In the development agreement process, we can work with them to say, okay, what's the impact of the community? What kind of things do we want to see from this project? How can you partner with the county and provide some things for the county to be able to get back? Especially use permitting stuff. That's where I'm more interested, because especially if we work with the regional planning commission and make sure that we're very much involved between this board, the RPC, and the county commission, to say, look, We don't want to issue that permit unless we see, you know, night sky compliant lights, some kind of, you know, bird thing to keep the birds, whatever. So that has more to do with the design of the facility. Whereas a development agreement would have more of how many guzzlers can you put in across the community to offset the impact to the elk herd or the antelope herds, you know. And so there's two ways to be able to be involved. And so we're gonna look at the ordinances and make sure that we are up to date. Our ordinances haven't really been updated when it comes to development projects at all. So.
I guess for me, I get a little nervous when you see these projects, just, you start seeing them, what's the latest one, 15,000 acres in Jakes Valley. They haven't come to the county commission, they haven't come to this board, and you just see legal notice after legal notice and no communication. And I don't know how we encourage these people, another one in View Valley, that exploration going on there. They haven't come to the county commission, they haven't.
Well, I'll tell you, they're not gonna get very far, because when they start working with BLM's gonna ask them, have you complied with county ordinances? And they'll go, what do you mean? And they'll say, the ordinance, you gotta go and present, you have to talk to them about development agreements, and special use permitting, and we have other ordinances on the books that we passed a few years ago that require special approval by the commission with any kind of project that may significantly impact the environment here. So just a general catch-all that they have to require them to come to the board to be compliant. And so they come through here and they're gonna send them, before they approve anything, they're gonna send them to White Plain County. Right, Jerry?
Correct.
So no one's building anything until they come here.
Okay.
It's like a little check relief valve. And that's where we all actually do work together, at least in this pretty well.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Anything else? Thanks, Mike. We'll move down to item 6, discussion updates from various agencies and organizations. Dylan.
For the record, Jared Biden, BLM, I'm a Bristol Field Manager, so I'm back to my day job. Just went back, Dick Vickers is back to his. There's not a huge change from the June report, so just a couple items. Bald Mountain Mine, the expansion, the EIS, so we're anticipating a notice of availability to be published by the end of the month. They get published in Federal Register notices on Fridays. It has been briefed all the way to headquarters, and we're just anticipating that draft EIS to be out hopefully in August for 45 days, and then we'll have a public comment meeting, and the exact days will depend on the exact date that notice is published. So finally get some traction. Got the Antelope Horse Gather, Antelope South in White Pine County, removal of 1,107 horses. Antelope North in Elko County, 2,000 horses. As of yesterday, there's about 700 horses removed from Antelope South. So the Lima Butte project out there in Butte Valley at the Golden Butte Mine, that's one of the proponents out there besides Selena. They are preparing an EA. So we do anticipate having an EA ready for public comment by the end of the summer. They have talked to us that if they do have a roads agreement in place with White Pine County, we have requested a copy of that. Otherwise, that's really about the only movement. All these projects are about the same place they are. Stagecoach Wind out in the Newark Valley, we anticipate the formal EIS project process to begin next calendar year.
And that's the furthest along, about all the renewables on that list, they're kind of the furthest ahead.
For production, yeah.
How many towers is that?
160, something like that.
It's a big project.
It's $850 million project. approval from the Department of Interior, DC, and so it's on a little bit different track than our normal processes, grants processes. So once the formal EIS starts in next calendar year, then it's 41 weeks to completion. There goes fast 41.
Any other questions? Thank you. Jose's not here. National Parks, there's a update in packets.
I'll blame it on the heat.
We're on to your
Mr. Chairman,
update.
I assume we are on to my report at this point.
Yes, sir.
I will skip down to the BLM proposed rule on renewable energy. I was able to take in one of their virtual sessions last week. I guess the punchline on this is obviously the administration is trying to streamline and make renewable energy development on public lands more attractive, and so probably the biggest incentive that the proposed rule offers is up to an 80% reduction in the fees that the BLM charges for wind and solar. I did ask about revenue sharing with local governments. They said that was essentially out of their control and something that Congress had to do. The one question I didn't ask that in hindsight I wish I had has to do with pending applications that kind of sit around forever and maybe never get acted on. So we will be putting together comments on that. It's due August 15th. So that'll be before this next meeting, but I think assuming the commission follows the recommendations and adopts the renewable energy policy that we just worked on, that will be very helpful to me. There are 2 more virtual sessions if folks are interested coming up, or I guess one now, but July 25th. They're all online, and you have to register for them, but the link is there in your report. I will just mention on the proposed Spring Valley National Monument, it appears that Senator Cortez Masto toured Spring Valley a couple weekends ago. I think it might have been in the local papers there. We will reach out to her staff and request a tour with the county as well. We still have not heard anything from the Department of Interior, but I did get a contact this week, and we will be reaching out to the Department of Interior as well, so everyone is clear as to the county's position and desire to be involved in whatever happens out there. BLM Greater Sage Grouse Resource Management Plan update rolls on. We are a cooperating agency and participating in bi-weekly calls. Due to our NDA, I can't really disclose much of the details, but it is every bit as challenging as the last 2 iterations. I will just say that. I did attach a BLM news release on the DOI grazing regulation updates. The administration has elected not to move forward with those reg updates, and rather they're going to look at updating their policy and guidance as it comes to grazing, or it relates to grazing. I don't know that anyone's completely sure what that means, but certainly something that we'll want to keep an eye on. Bald Mountain, nothing new to report, and Jared may have touched on this when I lost my audio, but I do anticipate the EIS, the draft EIS on that to be out shortly. MB Energy Greenlink North, we submitted our scoping comments on June 28th. One of the other items, big items that we're a cooperating agency on is the BLM Solar Programmatic EIS. That's looking at expanding and kind of defining where solar can and cannot be developed across, I think they're up to 7 western states now. Again, that's another one we're participating in bi-weekly meetings, and they did turn loose of a preliminary alternative matrix for public consumption, and that's attached. If you want to take a look, I think they have 5 proposed alternatives, and a couple of them had like A's and B's. So a lot of different potential options for what they're looking at, but I think almost all of them would result in more areas being open or authorized for solar. And I think everyone in the BLM is aware of the parallel track they're running with sage grouse. And I don't think anyone's completely clear on how that all works out in the end, but I certainly see that being a challenge for not only BLM, but the cooperating agencies. Of interest, they're adding Wyoming and Colorado, and I want to say maybe Idaho and Oregon to the list of areas where the programmatic solar EIS would be applied to, and a lot of local governments in those states are engaged and super active in the cooperating agency conversations. So that was a good thing to see. I don't really have any much of an update on pump storage. Wild horses, I did attach a couple press releases for the upcoming and probably ongoing animal complex at this point. And unless there's specific questions, we just have a couple of the future and upcoming meetings listed at the end. So with that, Chairman, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
My only question, we haven't heard anything about it, and I know you have a cooperative agency on that, but Pine and Wallowa Valley, has there been anything happening, or is it quiet?
Great question. About 6 months ago now, I reached out to the district manager who was running the environmental impact statement, or whose office was running that EIS. And it sounded like it got to a Washington, D.C. review, and there was some internal comments and an additional analysis that needed to be completed, and the EIS was kind of on hold at that point, and I have not heard any updates since then. So my assumption is that's where it sits. We are a cooperating agency, and I think whenever that new analysis is complete, we should be amongst the first to know as cooperating agency.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments for Jeremy? Down to item 8, which is public comment. Is there any?
This has been a Georgetown production. George Chachis reporting.